losing 1,000 of its soldiers a day, the Russian army still continues to advance. And we need to talk about this because they are now promising to push forward into the Dnipropetrovsk region any day now. At least that's what the propagandists are saying. We're going to find out now how likely such an outcome really is. Nevertheless, Russia is also facing a real personnel shortage. Everyone really has gone off to war. I mean, the workers, the marginalized, not the ones drinking Aperol, of course, not the Moscow elite in Patriarch's Ponds. There's no one left to take out the trash. Even local Russian social media pages are talking about this, but that doesn't make things any easier for us. We still have to defend our country from these people. Let's talk about how the occupying forces are complaining about hunger, which is driving them to kill even their own fellow soldiers. That's what this segment is about, and also about the situation on the front line. My name is Alexander Prepodobny. Let's get started.
Russia will continue to strike hard and precisely at Ukrainian cities until June 25. The Center for Countering Disinformation also warns that the aggressor is planning to attack our cities with swarms of drones. Over the past day, the enemy engaged in 176 combat clashes on the front. Ukrainian defenders repelled 52 of them in the Pokrovsk direction.
In the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy is trying to expand its presence in the area of the Marinovskaya interchange. This poses a threat of creating an operational encirclement. Accordingly, in the Pokrovsk direction, this is an advance toward the cities of the Pokrovsk agglomeration Dobropilya. Mirnoradand, the main threat is reaching the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region.
But the main flank and axis of advance for the occupying forces right now is moving along the Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka highway with the threat of reaching Kostiantynivka itself.
The Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka highway is a key logistical component for Ukraine's defense forces. At the moment, heavy fighting is taking place in the Pokrovsk direction, specifically in the areas around the settlements of Kotlin and Yudakhne. These settlements also represent an economic component of the Russian operation in the Pokrovsk direction.
These particular settlements are sites of coking coal deposits. This makes them even more attractive to the Russians as a source of financial gain. Another target the occupiers are dreaming of reaching is the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region. However, reaching it is not so much a financial matter for the Russians, but rather about satisfying their own vanity.
Their information policy, accordingly, is to present the successes of the Russian occupation forces as tactical achievements and as fulfilling the so-called first point of the special military operation. In other words, taking control of the territory of the Donetsk region.
According to the Deep State Project, the only point in the Luhansk region that was recently held by the Ukrainian armed forces is now in the red zone, meaning under the control of the occupiers.
After the tactical successes in the Bilohorivka area, the situation has become quite difficult for the units of the Ukrainian defense forces concentrated in the Serebryanske forestry. Therefore, going forward, the occupiers will try to expand their zone of presence in order to threaten to create an operational encirclement of the Ukrainian Defense Forces units both in the area of Siversk and, accordingly, in the Serebryanske forestry area.
The assaults along the entire front line are resulting in enormous losses for the occupiers. Just in the past day alone, Ukrainian defenders have eliminated over 1,000 enemies. And as for those whom the Ukrainians didn't take out, their own comrades ate them, and that's according to the Russians themselves.
So, the keychain ate itself in the mouth. No one is going to run away anywhere. The keychain killed him and then ate him for 2 weeks. Over.
While Russians are being killed and eaten in the war against Ukraine, Russian households are drowning in garbage. The waste removal company is complaining about the shortage of staff since all the garbage truck drivers have gone off to fight. And apparently the gaps aren't just in this company. If North Korea is planning to send 25,000 of its workers to assemble drones in Russia, another 6,000 sappers and military engineers will be brought from there as well, following the meeting between Sergei Shoigu and the Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. A significant breakthrough in military affairs for Ukrainians could be the testing of new means to counter Russian KABs and FABs. Some media outlets report that these systems also affect Shaheds. Ukraine, together with NATO, conducted equipment testing as part of the NATO Innovation Challenge project, and by the end of 2025, the partial deployment of a new multi-layered air defense system is expected.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Let's now talk with military expert Serhiy Hrabsky about the prospects of Russian advances. Sergei, hello, glad to see you.
Greetings.
Please tell us, we've been quite distracted, along with all our experts and speakers, by the Middle Eastern topic. But what's happening on the front lines right now? The Russians are shouting that they're about to break through into the Dnipropetrovsk region. But what is the situation really like?
Well, as for Dnipropetrovsk region, I understand that the situation is very difficult. But if we talk about the priority of tasks, the main and most tense area for us remains the Donetsk sector, specifically the section of the front line from Pokrovsk to Chasiv Yar. It is precisely there that the enemy is concentrating the bulk of its efforts and combat potential. Is there any advance, or is the enemy trying to move toward the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region? Yes, such attacks are taking place, but without any significant success, to be honest. And again, it should be noted that these attacks are, in fact, more of a diversion. From a military standpoint, advancing toward the Dnipropetrovsk region today makes no sense, and it would require allocating additional resources. And Russia is experiencing, rather serious problems with supplying personnel, weapons, and equipment. Therefore, as sarcastic as it may sound, the Dnipropetrovsk region is the least of our problems at the moment. Can they reach the border between the Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk region? Yes, absolutely. In fact, they have already appeared there before and were driven out. But does this mean that they will be able to make any significant breakthrough there, advance further, and gain a foothold in this direction? It's unlikely that we can talk about this today, given that, as I already mentioned, the enemy is focusing its attention specifically on active operations around Kostiantynivka. So therefore, to say that Dnipropetrovsk is some kind of marker or priority at the moment is hardly the case.
All right, let's talk about something else now. There is some interesting information from our GUR. Russian officers are avoiding the combat zone by hiding in rear units. And according to our intelligence officers, this phenomenon is widespread. Tell us more about this in detail. I'll read this message for the viewers to give them some context. So the GUR reports that, according to their data, approximately 45% of the officers of the occupying armed forces who are part of the reserve units of the Southern Military District of the Russian Armed Forces actually have no legal grounds to be serving in the rear, except for this. In documents signed by the Chief of Staff of the Southern Military District, Lieutenant General Zusko, there have been cases identified of more than 900 officers being unjustifiably transferred to rear units. Could you please explain what such data might indicate in military terms, these, let's say, kinds of schemes within the Russian military establishment?
Well, this scheme points to one thing, a desperate desire on the part of those who understand a bit more and those who have a better chance of surviving, because junior commanders, especially at the platoon and company level, are the ones who actually lead the soldiers into battle. Of course, they try not to be in the direct line of fire, but still they can't avoid it completely. Being in the frontline zone, the risk of being killed by Ukrainian drone strike or Ukrainian artillery is much higher. Therefore, understanding and seeing firsthand how the war is going, receiving and passing on information, spreading this information, they can undoubtedly come to the conclusion that their survival in one pisor, as they say, as a single chunk of meat may be very limited. In this regard, they taking advantage of their official positions, their resources and connections, if you will, try to avoid this bitter fate, essentially leaving the soldiers on the frontline, soldiers whom frankly they don't even consider to be people while trying to save their own skins. There's nothing more to say. In other words, this is in fact a typical situation for an occupying army, a typical situation for the Russian army, where officers, frankly, never valued their soldiers and regarded them as expendable as shells or bullets.
You know, there's something else I'd like to talk about. It seems like this case is, an isolated incident, but probably if our interceptors our signal operators were able to pick it up, then it could be considered a systemic phenomenon. For example, the GUR has once again published a conversation between Russian soldiers, and judging by it, one comrade simply ate another who had been considered missing. I don't know in what form or how exactly he did it, but cannibalism probably indicates that the mental state within the Russian army right now is far from ideal. But please correct me if that sounds too optimistic from our side. What does this actually tell us?
Basically, it shows that nothing has changed over the past 100 years. in the tradition of the existence of that subject of international law known as the Russian Federation, there have been such cases, and essentially nothing new is happening here. And let's even recall, well, for those who know and for those who don't. And back in the times of the so-called Gulag, when escapes among groups of prisoners were more frequent, there was always someone designated as the so-called canned food, whose purpose was to be eaten. So this is absolutely normal. As wild as it may sound to us, to Ukrainians, this is a completely normal phenomenon for Russians. So in essence, nothing out of the ordinary has happened. And listening to the dialogue, you probably noticed that there was absolutely no emotion there, just a statement of facts. So what we're saying is that the Russian army is not turning into a gathering of cannibals, it already is one. Of course, this is not a universal phenomenon. They are not eating or gnawing on each other. But undoubtedly, in the case of, let's say, special circumstances, and such circumstances happen to them quite often, they do not hesitate to taste human flesh in order to preserve their rotten existence. So here, it's not a mental issue, it's already a post-mental effect, because it's become something of a tradition, which, by the way, does not provoke condemnation in society. There's no need to save a person, everyone will die anyway. Well, let's just take this weeping boy, as they call it, and use him as a kind of backup canned food. Nothing surprising about that. This news didn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, just like Solovyov said, why are you all overestimating the meaning and value of human life? What are you talking about? That's normal. All right, let's talk about another topic. I think it's a very important one. The United States of America, according to Trump, might get involved in military action on Israel's side, but then he backtracks and says, only I know what I'll do and what I won't do. You don't know, and so on and so forth. Fox News claims that the US might use tactical nuclear weapons against nuclear targets in Iran, which, as I understand it, are located at a significant depth. Because of this, the Israeli Air Force can't hit them. What do you think about this? Is it really possible that American bombers could start bombing Iranian facilities?
Well, only the President of the United States knows what the President of the United States will do. And but predicting what might come to his mind the next day or even in an hour is very difficult. There is such a thing as impulsiveness, as well as unpredictability in decision-making, insufficient analysis, and so on and so forth. But that's a choice of the American people, and it's not our business. If we're talking about what consequences this might have, then I'm very concerned about the concept of a chain reaction. So what exactly are we talking about? It's not even just about Ukraine, although it is about Ukraine as well. That is, we need to understand that if a nuclear country, let's say a legally recognized nuclear state, uses nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear country such as Iran de jure, it could give Russian aggressors a free hand to carry out tactical nuclear strikes against Ukraine. This is, a very ominous scenario. And I have a deep, more than deep conviction, again, based on my experience, that under any circumstances, even if some strike capabilities of the United States are used, we are not talking about nuclear weapons. Yes, in their rhetoric, just like the Russians, they might use such a threat, this kind of scare tactic, but in practice, it's unlikely they would actually do it. And of course, the third question, tell me please, what would the United States gain by striking nuclear facilities in Iran? Can they be sure they would be able to destroy them? I have my doubts. And would America actually carry out a so-called ground operation? Again, I have serious doubts about that. Why am I talking about a ground operation? It's important to understand the following. If we're talking about destroying the Ayatollah's regime, then without a ground component, any kind of air operation is pointless. Iran is a country that has been living under sanctions for 40 years, actually 45 years now. So it's very hard to scare them with anything. Yes, there are a lot of people in the country who hate this regime, but nevertheless, at one time the Iran-Iraq war played a rather sinister role in the formation of this regime. Gave the Ayatollahs the opportunity to establish it as one of the most bloody and despotic. And there is a force there that is focused on maintaining the stability of this regime, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And in order to hold protests, you need a kind of unifying force that is ready to organize and lead these protests. Is there such a force in Iran? Sorry, no. So In this case, any actions by America could provoke a completely unpredictable reaction. Even if we assume, let's suppose that yes, indeed, America intervenes, some kind of military action begins, a civil war breaks out, and the Ayatollah's regime falls, what would be the first reaction? Refugees. Would Europe, as the nearest sort of refuge for refugees, be able to handle yet another wave of refugees? It's a very, very complicated question. Moreover, this issue could affect us as well. So the situation here is very, very ambiguous. Of course, I want to emphasize Israel had no choice. It was forced to launch such military actions because we can see what happens here after a preemptive strike. When Israel is under bombardment by rockets, they are going through the same things that we are experiencing. But nevertheless, they had no choice because if they had allowed the creation of nuclear weapons, especially considering the specifics of their religion, that is the Shiite branch of Islam promoted by the Ayatollah regime in Tehran, well, the likelihood that they might use nuclear weapons would have increased. That's why, in general, Israel resorted to such an unpopular but necessary measure. And how will the situation develop? Let's wait and see. The East is a delicate matter. If you remember the line from a very old movie.
Yes, absolutely. There's one more thing I'd like to discuss with you before we finish. It seems that Russians are not planning to support Iran militarily because Russian propaganda is already ramping up full forces, saying that no one owes anything to anyone, and that this document signed with Iran in the winter doesn't actually entail any military obligations. It's about military production or something else. In short, no one and no one owes anything to anyone. From a military standpoint, could you please tell me if Iran, let's say, disconnects from Russia, how would that affect the course of the Russia-Ukraine war? Are they currently a serious, significant supplier for Russia or not?
It won't have any effect. Why? Because even if we're talking about drones, about Shaheeds, you have to understand that we just traditionally call these drones Shaheeds. In reality, they're no longer Iranian. So yes, it was a one-time deal. Yes, Iran sold, if I'm not mistaken, 6,000 drones for gold, received that gold, and basically everyone was satisfied. Moreover, as of today, the presence of Iranian components in the drones is either completely absent or extremely minimal, which doesn't affect drone production at all. But the presence of Chinese components plays a critical role. Russia, and we need to be honest about Dish has mastered the production of these drones. So purchasing drones from Iran is not planned at all. Again, Iran has not transferred them. Now we understand why it has not transferred its ballistic missiles to the Russian Federation, something we've talked about many times, emphasizing that this would not happen. Basically, this is also a factor we rule out because it simply cannot be compared or equated with what is happening on the front line. The involvement of the armed forces of Iran or the Russian Federation in the conflict is, well, completely ruled out. The same applies if we are talking about Ukraine. Well, let's put it this way. As of today, due to the absence of a physical or land border between Iran and Israel, it's unlikely that one will ever exist. The use of ground armed forces is ruled out. Why did I start from so far back? Because essentially, if we're talking about how the situation, or rather how the conflict in the Middle East could affect the supply of weapons and military equipment to Israel or to our own situation, again, it won't have any impact because the ground component is not involved, is not taking part in the hostilities. For now, we are just observing, and it's very important for us that this conflict does not escalate to another level. I already mentioned refugees, and here it's important to understand that in the event of a serious deterioration of the situation, particularly in Iran, let's remember the population there is 86 million, if I'm not mistaken. Even if just 10% of them become refugees, that would be a huge number.
Sergei, as we wrap up, the military aid package from Joseph Biden is set to run out very soon. We talked about two possible options, free aid from the US or the sale of weapons. But honestly, right now it seems like there are hardly any chances even for the sale of weapons to Ukraine from the United States. What do you think about this? Will we be able to hold out without American supplies, or will Trump end up selling Ukraine the weapons it needs?
Well, there's really no reason or need to pin our hopes on Trump right now. We understood this, even if you recall our conversations back in the spring, that something like this could happen. We understand perfectly well that we have a so-called deadline, which is somewhere around September or maybe even earlier. And well, a lot could happen by then. Again, as I've already mentioned, it's hardly possible to assess or make any predictions regarding the future relationship between America and Ukraine. Specifically with the current Ukrainian administration, I want to emphasize the current administration because, in essence, America remains our reliable ally, our largest ally. Could it be difficult? Yes, it could. Yes, it could be difficult, but we are taking quite energetic measures to minimize such a negative scenario and to prevent any serious setbacks at the front, or ideally to prevent any setbacks at the front at all. Right now, we are at a rather high level of combat intensity, but overall, despite territorial losses, we are actually showing quite decent results. And considering that Europe, just like us, is aware of the possible actions, or rather inaction of the current American administration, the European component in the segment of aid to Ukraine is being increased to 60%. That is 30% is what Ukraine is already doing, with the possibility to increase it to 40% or even up to 45 plus European support over time. But I emphasize the next few months may be quite difficult. We will completely get rid of the need to rely solely on American aid. But it's very difficult to make any kind of prediction here, even from a common sense perspective. Well, America has to sell weapons to someone. The very best advertisement for selling weapons is selling weapons to Ukraine. There is money for this. And, well, I can shake the feeling, if you will, that common sense in America, rather, business interests in America will prevail. That is, America will continue to supply weapons to Ukraine, most likely for money, but it will continue.
I'll just say in conclusion, here's a message from yesterday so that our viewers understand just how unclear everything still is. There was another briefing at the White House, and Trump said he needs 2 weeks, the infamous 2 weeks, to make a decision on Iran. Well, dear viewers, just remember how he talked about Putin, saying that in 2 weeks he would figure out whether Putin was deceiving him or not. In general, it feels like Arestovich once started this unhealthy relay, which has infected everyone. Thank you very much. Serhiy Khabsky, military expert, was on the air with Ukraine Today. Thank you. All the best. Goodbye.
Goodbye.